And the Algerian War 50 years on. It's our top story this morning, and as ever, joined here by International Affairs Editor today, it's Douglas Herbert. Doug, we heard in that report then, half a century since the formal ceasefire ended France's, as you said, nearly 8-year war with Algeria. But no national commemoration in France. Why is that?
Absolutely not. This is, as you said, a very divisive day, March 19th, in French and Algerian history. This basically marked the postscript to the war, which was a very shameful defeat. There's no other way of terming it for French forces. Like we heard in that report, 400,000 dying on both sides. We had French forces in the aftermath accused of atrocities against Algerian fighters, Algerian civilians. So this is not just a glorious chapter of history, far from it. Now, we saw the uprooting and the repatriation of hundreds of thousands of French who had been living in Algeria, the group of population called the Pieds Noirs, and they all had to come back. They're a big pressure group today in France still. There are hundreds of thousands of them and their descendants, and also the Harkis. And that is the term that is used to sort of designate all of not just Algerians, but Muslims from across North Africa, often Tunisia and Morocco, who fought on the side of French soldiers, who afterwards were often the butt of brutal reprisals from, in one case, an organization called the OAS, the Organization of the Secret Army, massacres, armed insurrections, assassination attempts against a lot of these people, which followed the signing of the ceasefire. So for these groups, the Pieds Noirs, the Harkis, this date was really the beginning of a very painful postscript of reprisals, atrocities, torture, often massacres against them. The date that they all prefer to celebrate is December 5th. No big event happened, obviously, in Algeria on that date, but in 2003, it's the date that Jacques Chirac, former French president, decided to inaugurate a monument here in Paris, which basically commemorated all soldiers who fought in the fighting from 1952 to 1962, whether Moroccan, Tunisian, or Algerian. That's the date that they've chosen.
Massive event, of course, in Algeria as well, so presumably big commemorations there?
No commemorations, actually, in Algeria. Algerians themselves are struggling to get to grips with this history. It's still an extremely divisive issue there. But in general, the society itself is still waiting for France to issue an apology for crimes that Algerians believe the French are yet to face up to throughout this war and its aftermath. In Algeria, the date is not March 19th, the signing of the Accords. Most people really don't know what that's about. You'll find a lot of young Algerians especially drawing a blank on that date. The date that's celebrated there more is July 5th, and it's from that date on, actually for an entire year. July 5th was the proclamation of Algerian independence. That's the date they choose to celebrate. That's the date they're going to mark. You actually have some groups right now, sympathizers of the former national liberation movement in Algeria, who are actually sponsoring a law to make the colonization or talk about it a criminal act. So the French episode, that 130-year colonization, the war period as well, the 8-year war, very, very much a divisive subject in Algeria, and still one that fans flames and gets people very much on edge when you talk about it.
And also in Algeria, a bit of a feeling that the revolution itself, the independence movement, has been rather usurped.
This is interesting because, we say, okay, they got their independence, great, Algerian history can move on. Not really at all, because there's a sense among many Algerians today that the revolution was essentially hijacked. The spirit of that revolution, the spirit of independence, the political ideals born of that revolution was taken by cynical, calculating, scheming military men who, over the subsequent years and decades, right up into the present day, have really installed in power the people that they like in their own interests. We had, Ahmed Ben Bella was the first sort of president, seen as a puppet president, installed in power by a very narrow military clan to give a veneer of legitimacy to Algeria's newfound independence. But you do have a lot of people saying that Algeria got stuck after the revolution, and that those political ideals, Algeria never really got a chance to fulfill those ideals, to move forward, to create an Algeria in its own image. We had, as we know, in the 90s, a very bloody decade of war against the Islamists there, and it was, and up until this day, they're still healing those wounds, and they're still, the man in power today, still seen to a certain extent as not completely reflecting the political ideals of that revolution.
What about young Algerians? Do they care about this?
Very briefly, the young Algerians feel very disenfranchised today. This is an old war. This is their parents' war. This is a war that is not top of their agenda, their concerns. These are high unemployment in the society, Algerians scraping for money, living off their parents, feeling like, this is a society where you still need contacts, you need to grease the wheels, you need to pay off to do any small businesses, make payoffs. They feel locked out. These are the concerns they have. The economy, the lack of social movement, they want that sort of liberation. The revolution and this war old war, yes, they're proud for what their parents did, but they don't feel like they are actually reaping the benefits of it right now.
And finally, it's even come into the presidential debate, hasn't it, as we head towards the election?
Absolutely. Like I said, the Harkis that I spoke about and the Pieds Noirs, they've often represented traditionally on the right and the far right. And Nicolas Sarkozy, and to a greater extent even Marine Le Pen, the far-right candidate, have been looking for their vote. There are about 3.2 million of them, Stuart, representing those groups. Big pressure groups in France. Nicolas Sarkozy recently spoke to them, addressed the Pieds Noirs, speaking of the nightmare they endured, and basically saying that they had to choose between the suitcase and the coffin. So trying to reach out to them, very difficult, towing a very, very fine line here, and it's going to be a difficult issue for France in general as they move ahead.
He told me before we came in how he had a lot to say. He just about fitted it in. Doug Herbert, International Affairs Editor here on France 24.